Good afternoon. I'll call to order this meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Cam Gordon, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by Council Members Fry, Bender, Andrew Johnson, and Elizabeth Glidden. We're a quorum of the committee, and we can do our business. We have 6 items on our agenda today, 2 consent items, and then 4 discussion items. So we should have a reasonably busy 90 minutes or so. I'll first move the consent items forward for approval. If any committee member wants to pull something off, go right ahead. Just let me know. First one is approving a correction to the terms of the dates for the appointment of Raymond Boyle to the Public Health Advisory Committee. This term would begin January 1, 2017 and end December 31, 2017. And the second item is authorizing acceptance of a $20,000 grant from the National Marrow Donor Program. Seeing no discussion on any of those, I will move both those items forward for approval. Please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say no. That carries. Then we'll move on to our discussion items. The first one is a Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council report on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. And I think we'll have a little presentation on that. And there's a resolution on the agenda that would be designating or affirming that the city would join that agreement. Welcome. Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am proud to be in front of you today on behalf of the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council, representing their recommendation as well as my own as the local food policy and Homegrown Minneapolis coordinator for the city. I will just give you today a very brief overview of how the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council has been given by you the charge to make the type of recommendation that they are making, and what the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact entails, and to solicit your support for our city considering being a signatory in that pact. As you all are very well aware and have been very involved in, we have a very vibrant food culture here, but yet we still have some persistent inequities that we are working to address through the Food Council and through all of your active support. And so are ever looking for opportunities to leverage resources and partnerships to make more impact in our food system here. Our leadership has also been widely recognized around the country, and I think we are a member of a group of cities who, in partnership, have an opportunity to do something together to continue that leadership and our recognition thereof. So as you know, the Homegrown Minneapolis is a city community partnership. We have a food council that is a result of that, as well as initially back in 2009, there were a large set of recommendations brought forward to the city council from the food councils, or from the Homegrown Minneapolis process, I should say. That is now 8 years ago, and it's a good time to think about a review and a refresh of what we're doing and some new opportunities. The Food Council itself was established in 2012, and that group's charge includes advising the City Council, the Mayor, and the Park Board on food system opportunities and challenges, which is why I'm in front of you today. We have an opportunity and a recommendation by the Food Council to consider signing on to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. This pact was launched in 2015, and at its initial signing, there were about 40 cities signing on, and now that number has grown to be over 150. And we hope to be one of those cities that make that list even longer for a few reasons. This is a voluntary pact which has a framework for action that includes all the categories of the Homegrown Minneapolis Initiative. Our initiative includes growing, processing, distributing, eating, and composting, which are all present here, as well as a category on governance and a category on social and economic equity. So it takes and expands the work that we've already identified even farther and provides many voluntary actions that are pathways for more progress in the food system. There are a number of commitments. Again, this is a voluntary pact and framework which provides both a community of peer cities that we could together review our progress with, as well as to look at some specific measurements within those pathways of action that could help us to specifically both adopt some actions within each category, as well as some related targets and benchmarks that could help us as a city to have enduring measurements for our food system progress, which today we have but one through the community indicators healthy food access measurement. So this opportunity would allow us with our peer cities to affirm our food system commitment and the previous actions that we have taken. It would allow us to continue our leadership on food system issues and provide pathways forward for additional action. And through the draft indicators that this PACT's leadership team is reviewing, give us some opportunities to explore and potentially endorse some measurements that this city could look at for the future using as targets for our food system work. We also have a number of peer cities who have signed on and are considering signing on, including current signatories, Austin, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and others now, Washington, D.C., Denver, and Madison being in the process of potentially signing soon. So these cities together have looked at, through a food policy advisors group at the Conference of Mayors, using this framework as its framework with the Conference of Mayors Food Policy Task Force, and looking at its related metrics as a way for our cities to look at each other's work and to think about how we might take some collective action on food system across the country. So there's a real opportunity there to work with our peer cities on some further success. And again, there's also one more, a small award that could be one which Baltimore has received in the past to recognize food system work, which has been done within this framework. With all that said, again, this is a very brief overview, so I understand if there might be any specific questions about the framework, the metrics. It is a real nearly seamless fit with the Homegrown Minneapolis framework and recommendations that already exist. And so when discussed at the Food Council meeting, it felt like a real opportunity for us to, again, affirm what we're doing and to look at our continued work going forward. So the recommendation being that we sign on to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and a City Council resolution to be adopted saying as much on behalf of the city. And I'm happy to take any questions about the rationale or the pact itself.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions right now. I was at the Food Council when we discussed this as well, and it seemed to be the consensus of the group that there wasn't any risk to getting involved in this, but there was the potential to have some great benefits because of all the other cities that are involved, and also because of the metrics that we could use then to compare ourselves to other cities throughout the world, and other possibilities for creating greater synergy. So I'm happy to move this forward. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, then all those in favor of the resolution declaring support for the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and agreeing to sign on, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to a little, maybe not so little, but an update and a report on our blueprint for powering Minneapolis municipal operations with 100% renewable electricity by 2022. I think we did see a little bit of this report a couple meetings ago, but we wanted to bring it back for some clarifications and some updates, and it should also be in the packet. And we'll let Brian get set up. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Chair Gordon, other council committee members, I'm Brian Milberg, Energy Manager for the City of Minneapolis. 3 months ago, I got the assignment from this committee and the council to look at ways that the city could transition to 100% renewable electricity, hopefully by the year 2022. I'm here, I've submitted a report with the RCA paperwork, and I'd just like to go through a couple of the highlights of that report. So basically, there are 4 parts to the plan. The first part is to reduce our total energy consumption from 101 million kilowatt hours a year to 85 million kilowatt hours a year. I reported on this about a month ago to the committee and the ways that we can do that, and I'll go over those in just a minute. The second is to purchase electricity where the city can own the renewable energy credits. And right now, the way we've chosen to do that initially is through the Renewable Connect program with Xcel Energy, which I will cover in a minute. The third way to try to reach this goal is to actually install as much solar that we own outright on our buildings and any city land. And these three items will cost money, obviously, and to offset these extra costs, the fourth tier of this plan is to continue to subscribe to community solar gardens where we actually save we actually save money on our electricity bill, and we'll use that to offset the extra costs of these choices. So as I stated before in my earlier presentation, basically there are three main areas we're looking at to reduce our electricity usage in the city and its operations. The first, of course, is any new buildings that we produce and any remodeling that we do, any of our existing buildings. We always go with the most efficient appliances, HVAC equipment, building envelope, insulation, all of those things. And that will probably reduce our energy from electricity by 2 to 5% over the next 5 years. The next two items relate directly to our street lighting. We actually have about 32 million kilowatt hours of the 101 million are actually from street lighting in the city. Half of that is from Xcel, of the poles that they own, and half are the poles that the city owns outright. Xcel has put forward a plan over the next 5 years to replace all of their street lighting with LEDs, which will reduce the electricity usage by 60% in those lights. And we do count that electricity towards our greenhouse gas, so we would count those reductions. As well as the city, in the lights that we own, we have our own program, although it's going at a slower pace at this point, but we are replacing those with LED lamps as well. Between these three items, we should be able to get to that 85 million kilowatt hours a year. So back to the first option now is we have to find electricity where we own the renewable energy credits, or RECs. So initially we have chosen to buy into the Renewable Connect program through Xcel Energy, which is where they have a specified wind farm, where the renewable energy credits are accruing to us instead of Xcel. We pay about 0.8 of 1 cent per kilowatt hour for this right now. We've signed up for 17.8 million kilowatt hours already, and we are, with Xcel, petitioning the Public Utilities Commission to amend the tariff so that we could take an additional 50 million kilowatt hours. The first 17.8, we signed a 10-year contract. I'm proposing on the second set of 50 million, we sign only a 5-year contract, and I'll get into why in a moment. And if we do go to the full 67.8, that would cost about $500,000 a year extra over our existing costs. So it's about a 7 to 8% increase in our electricity costs to do this. In the plan, which I'll show you, we feel that there are other opportunities in the marketplace that are coming to the fore where we could get renewable energy credits from new resources in the state by 2022 at a much lower cost than the Renewable Connect program. So this is part of the reason why this next large bolus of Renewable Connect, we're talking about just taking a 5-year contract. Excuse me, backwards. The second option, as we said in the first slide, was to add more solar. While we have 9 solar arrays spread out amongst many of our buildings, there's actually only one where the renewable energy credits are accruing to the city. It's on top of the Royalston Maintenance Facility. It generates about 110,000 kilowatt hours a year. And we've started now to begin looking at all the roofs on all of the city-owned structures to see which could support solar and which seem to make sense economically. We also are talking about possibly siting solar on land at the water treatment sites on their underground reservoirs. We're looking at starting an engineering study to make sure the reservoirs can take that extra weight. And between all of this, we feel that it's possible by 2022 we could generate 8 million kilowatt hours a year with our own solar arrays. And this would actually reduce our electricity cost by $500,000 to $600,000 a year. However, the arrays are a capital expense of $10 to $12 million. We don't have a funding source for those at this time, but it's an option that I think the council should consider. And then lastly, to try and pay for all of this, we'll be using the community solar gardens. So in 2016, the city told me go out and get 12 million kilowatt hours of electricity from community solar gardens. We've signed up so far for 7.5 million. We just started receiving some this month, and that will roll out in the first quarter, the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year. We should be on tap to have all 7.5 million next year. And we're saving about $125,000 to $150,000 a year with that amount of electricity. The council gave me authorization for 12 million, so that means I still have 4.5 million we haven't purchased at this time. So I'm proposing that we go out and find that electricity as well, and that would raise that savings to $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Now, we could also go out for savings even much greater than that. We could, in theory, subscribe to solar gardens for our entire electricity load, all 85 million kilowatt hours, as a cost-saving measure. So it is an option if enough gardens get built in this area. So what I'm proposing, although nothing has been written in stone, and of course this will be a council action, a direction for our staff, is that we've already started purchasing the 17.8 million kilowatt hours from Renewable Connect. If the PUC approves, we would recommend to the council then that we take the additional 50 million, which would get us to 67.8. And then we have one small purchase of outside renewable energy credits on the open marketplace that will offset the small portion of the convention center that comes from their solar array, which unfortunately the renewable energy credits from that array go to Xcel Energy because of the funding mechanism that built that array. But if we did this, it'd be about $4,000 a year, and then the convention center could claim they are 100% powered by renewable electricity. $4,000 a year additional to what they're paying now. I would like to see from our staff, we feel that it would be beneficial to accelerate the pace with which we're replacing our LED streetlights. We've done about 1,000 over the last 2 years. We have close to 11,000 to go. So it would be a capital expense. And then we would start the engineering studies, which don't cost too much, probably for less than $10,000. We can do all our buildings. And then over the next 5 years, as opportunities come up, we would participate in more and more solar gardens to save more money.
Just stop for a second on that slide. It seems like a couple of those items had budget considerations, or maybe more than a couple. And I'm curious if there's money in the 2018 budget that's proposed to cover any of these. I understand that there is for the increase in Renewable Connect purchases, I believe. But I'm not sure about the $4,000 in recs from the convention center. That certainly seems like a small enough amount that it might be in their own budget at the convention center.
Well, it's not in their budget. I'm still discussing it with Jeff Johnson, the director of the convention center. But the last two items of the extra solar gardens and the increasing the rate of installation of LED lights, that is not in the budget. Now, the solar gardens shouldn't take any money out of the budget if we do it correctly, because we'll save money, not spend money.
So the two that are really more striking that are missing is accelerating installation of LED and also the engineering cost studies for the new solar on land and buildings.
Yes.
I think those Engineering studies will be really important because we talk about different places where we should put it,
Mhm.
and we don't really understand the cost, but we seem to think that we would be able to borrow on that or be able to provide funding for it. So that seems critical. And could you just tell me once again, I think you did say this, but how much do you think those studies, the engineering studies, would cost?
I feel we could do the engineering studies for $10,000.
Okay.
It's fairly simple structural analysis of each of the buildings.
And the acceleration of LED street lighting fixtures, how
Well,
much?
that I don't have a number for. I'd
Okay.
have to work with the traffic department, the streets department on that. Yeah, I do know it is not in their budget to accelerate. They are going to continue replacing, but not at an accelerated pace.
And as I recall, in previous years, we even took some money away from that program to spend it on other items. So that's something we'll have to look at.
I don't know, but that's
Yeah,
possible.
we did. Yeah. But, okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I don't see other questions. Continue.
So I just wanted to show a quick chart here that shows over time what's happening. The bars are increasing amounts of renewable energy. The orange bars are the renewable energy credits that we accrue through the Renewable Connect program. And you'll see for the first 5 years, we actually started late in 2017. So there's a very small amount in 2017, but assuming we get the full 50 million extra sometime in first quarter, we ramp up in 2018, and by 2019, we'll be on track at 67.8 million kilowatt hours a year. It's difficult to see, but there's a very slim blue bar up until the year 2022. And then in 2023, the thinking is, at least today, because of the pricing of the Renewable Connect program, when that 5-year contract expires, we would be looking for a much cheaper way to get the renewable energy credits with a project here in Minnesota. We have been approached by one developer who's interested in building a wind farm, and they feel that if we were to agree to a contract to purchase the renewable energy credits from that wind farm at about half the cost of what we're spending for Renewable Connect, they could then take that to a financier and build the wind farm over the next 2 to 3 years. This, of course, has to be vetted through our legal department. This is something that's never been done in Minnesota. We think it is legal, but of course, we'll have to make sure all the details are worked out. But that's one type of an option that we're thinking of, and we think there could be others as the market grows. I just want to say there's nothing wrong with the Renewable Connect. It is a wind source right here in the state. It's just that the price is significant.
So
Go ahead.
just to be clear, generally I'm concerned about just buying RECs off the open market, but what we're saying is these would be renewable energy credits dedicated to a solar array or solar power facility that we would then be helping to finance and would be tied to.
Well, we wouldn't actually be financing it, Chair Gordon. We would be just signing a contract that they could take to their own financiers to show what their funding sources would be.
Correct.
But it would be what we call additionality. It would be an additional resource that does not exist today, which is we could, if we wanted to, we could go on the marketplace right now very inexpensively and buy RECs for all of this. But the council, I felt, made it fairly clear that we're trying to grow the resources here, at least in the upper Midwest and hopefully in Minnesota and possibly in Minneapolis itself. And this plan does that.
I appreciate that. I'll remember that word, additionality.
Additionality. The green bar at the top is the renewable energy we would produce on our own solar arrays if we were to build out to the full 8 million. So that's my presentation. As I said, this is all just a plan. Obviously, we would be taking staff direction from the committee and the council as to which of these options we should pursue.
I appreciate that. Councilmember Bender has a comment or question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you put the image back up? I wanted to ask more about this.
The graph?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Of building a city solar array. And can you talk about what it would really take to get that in place by 2019, 2020, as it's showing here?
The renewable
The
Connect program?
solar,
The
if
city
we build our
solar.
own city solar array.
So what I'm showing here is a slight build out in 2018-19. So right now we're only at 110,000. Look at the actual report. By 2019, we would be about 5 times that, 500,000. The plan there is on either the new buildings we're producing at the Hiawatha site or perhaps the East Side Storage Yard at 27th and University. All of these buildings are being built solar ready. And so that would get us to the 500,000 fairly quickly. And then after that, we would have to start using land options that have been talked about are at the water treatment plant. Several people have come to us, even Solar Garden people have said, can we take some of that land by your current impound lot and turn that into a solar garden? Of course, that's all open for new development. As you know, we're replacing the impound structure as well as the lot. So that's a little farther out, but we could get to the 500,000 by the end of 2019 quite easily.
So maybe you could go back to the slide right before this where you seem to outline the directions that you're seeking. And I think what you maybe what we could easily direct you to do isn't actually on that slide probably, but you talked a little bit about going out for a bid package requesting the 4.5 million kilowatt hours in solar gardens that we already authorized. So I'm very comfortable moving to say, take
Okay.
that next step now and go ahead and do that. I'm a little reluctant. I'm excited saying that we do need to have that analysis about where we can put our solar arrays. But if you're saying that it costs $10,000, I'm not sure that we have that money available right now, is what you're saying. We probably don't. So is that a direction that you would want now, or would we have to identify the funding of that?
Well, luckily, I don't deal with the budgetary issues in my department, so I don't know whether we have the money for the engineering studies at this time or not. I feel that we could, next year, based on my history here at the city, I'm sure we could find some money to do it. But the big item is the LED streetlights. We're talking several $1 million to accelerate that each year. I mean, it's not cheap.
And that would be another budget item.
And that's obviously not in my area, so.
One of the other action steps you had in your report was examine the feasibility of a third-party wind farm development with the RECs assigned to the city. It was the big blue bar that we also saw in the graph.
Yes.
And that is, we could direct you to do that on your own at this point. You could keep examining that. I think that's a very exciting possibility.
In conjunction with the last RFP we just did for low-income housing solar gardens, I'm meeting with the attorney's office, and we'll bring this up as well then in that discussion as another item for them to start working with us on.
So how about if I move that staff direction then? I just read to examine the feasibility of a third-party wind farm development with the renewable energy credits assigned to the city, which is on page 4 of the report. And then also before the end of 2017, released the bid package requesting current community solar garden subscription pricing for up to the remaining 4.5 million kilowatts of the originally authorized 12 million kilowatts of community solar garden subscriptions. That's on the bottom of page 6. Is that clear to everybody? Any discussion on that staff direction? And at the same time, why don't we vote to receive and file the report? Seeing no questions, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries then. This is very exciting. I can't wait to be around to see it all happen. Appreciate all the work you've done on it.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to 2 annual reports, both related. I think one of them is the first one is the American with Disabilities Act Annual Plan Report Update. Mr. Rubidor.
Chair Gordon and committee members, good afternoon. I'm David Rubidor, Director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department with the City of Minneapolis. I also serve as the city's Americans with Disabilities Act Title II Coordinator. As you may recall, in 2016, the city adopted a new ADA action plan. And as part of that plan, we said we would come back to the council on an annual basis to update you on the status and the work that's been undertaken. Today, Nick No, the staff from NCR, will walk you through the details of the plan and what has occurred over the last year. and this is being presented to you as a receive and file item. So with pleasure of the chair, I'd like to hand it over to Nick.
Certainly. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon, committee members. Quickly, today I'll be going over the legal requirements of the ADA for the city of Minneapolis, what the ADA action plan is, as well as our current ADA infrastructure and then accomplishments this last year. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. Out of the ADA, there are 5 primary titles. The city of Minneapolis falls under Title II, which applies to state and local government. And what that really says is it prohibits discrimination and ensures equal access for everyone to city programs, services, and activities. This last year, as Director Rubador has mentioned, the council adopted the 2016 ADA Action Plan. This was an enterprise-wide initiative, and many of our partners are here from Property Services, Public Works, IT, and Communications. This was an effort to create a comprehensive policy document with identified strategies to remove physical, communications, and policy barriers for participation and inclusion of people with disabilities. The primary components of the plan is what the city's Title II ADA infrastructure is to meet the compliance pieces that's defined by the Department of Justice, as well as the enterprise policies, procedures, and strategies for inclusion of people with disabilities. The most important part of the plan is actually a timetable and prioritized list of how we're going to remediate any deficiencies, as well as physical modifications and program enhancements. As mentioned in the last slide, this is an enterprise-wide effort. This is what the slide depicts is our current Title II infrastructure. Under the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, we're primarily responsible for Title II compliance. Director Rubador is the city's Title II coordinator. We support the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities, as well as provide technical assistance and counsel to city departments. This last year, Property Services and Public Works also did an evaluation of our physical inventory. Property Services is responsible for any modifications and improvements to our city facilities and leased spaces, as well as Public Works is responsible for physical access of our public right-of-ways, which includes streets, curb ramps, sidewalks, pedestrian signals, as well as traffic signals. So as mentioned, NCR is responsible for Title II coordination and compliance. One of the primary strategies that we've done is review and modify city procedures and protocols. One of the first things that we addressed was access to decision-making processes. Under the engagement design team, they put accessibility planning at the forefront of engagement activities that the city undergoes. One of them is providing interpreting services to large public hearings and meetings, such as our sick and safe time, police body cameras, as well as minimum wage. The last 2 years, we have undergone the certification program under the ADA coordinator training program that's held by the Great Lakes Center to make sure that we are ADA certified as coordinators and to provide that technical assistance to the city enterprise. This last year, we've also hosted 4 different sessions that covers accessibility for content, as well as disability awareness and how to work with people with disabilities. This last year, we've also addressed 32 grievances under our current ADA system. This is in partnership with our 311 department as well as civil rights, and we're currently developing the ADA technical assistance program for neighborhood organizations, and we're planning to roll that out next year in 2018. So engagement is a primary pillar of the ADA action plan. We cannot do this work without people with disabilities and their input. This last year, we dedicated a lot of time into fostering and strengthening partnerships with local and national leaders in the disability community. This last year, the United States Federal Access Board was in town as part of their national tour. We hosted a networking session between them, city elected officials, enterprise leadership, as well as local community leaders. We also work closely with the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities, the State Council on Disability, and the Park Board to host this event. And then we've actually strengthened our partnership with the Minnesota State Council on Disability, especially in areas of providing accessibility support to local businesses and improving their access ways. as well as supporting our Minneapolis Advisory Committee as they address various topics such as bike lanes, parking, reviewing plans for right-of-ways, public and housing developments, as well as recreation accessibility. Technology has greatly benefited the disability community, and the city's online presence is an integral part of our information system. In 2017, the IT department coordinated a dual effort to, one, make progress and fix current issues with our website content management system, and at the same time, start a process to implement a new system. During this time, they also trained our city's web content users group to analyze web pages for accessibility issues and how to create accessible PDFs and content. IT selected a vendor named Clockwork to manage what they call the website project. And this is really the coordination of the process of implementing a new content management system. They will be writing the RFP, selecting the vendor, as well as seeing the implementation process through. During this process, they'll be doing usability and accessibility testing to make sure that this project is accessible to not only people with disabilities, but everyone. A large goal of the project is to implement a system capable of identifying and addressing accessibility issues in the forefront. As mentioned, Property Services this last year, or 2 years ago, did an evaluation of our city-owned and leased facilities. They created what's known as an ADA transition plan, which identifies and prioritizes physical issues and modifications. This last year, they finished their phase 1 component, which saw over 600 improvements and upgrades to our city facilities, 450 signage upgrades to 17 facilities, striping and signage at police precincts and service nodes, ongoing restroom accessory modifications, installation of door operating buttons at the Aldrich facility restrooms, as well as modifying precincts 2 locker room. Another part of their accomplishments is actually updating the ramp at our community service building for the elections department. This was done in partnership with our city clerk's office, as well as the advisory committee on people with disabilities. They've also completed restroom upgrades to fire stations 4, 8, and 15. They've removed an entrance barrier at fire station 20. And then again, they renovated the Aldrich locker room to be more accessible. In 2012, Public Works created a transition plan, and a large part of that plan is to identify deficiencies and physical access barriers at our pedestrian ramps. Since that time, they've been fixing and modifying pedestrian ramps across the city. This year, they completed 326 renovations for pedestrian ramps. 150 additional ramps were expected to be completed by the end of this year. In addition to those ramp upgrades, they've also installed APS signals, accessible pedestrian signals at 75 different intersections, as well as proposed a new sidewalk gap program in the 2018 budget. Public Works will be undergoing an update to their transition plan in 2018 and 2019. They selected a vendor to work with them in identifying areas to improve their plan. One of the plan updates includes reviewing their programs, policies, procedures, and training, as well as identifying criteria for prioritizing and timetabling for improvements, as well as an updated implementation plan. At this time, I would like to yield the floor back to Director Rubidor.
Chair Gordon and committee members, so in closing, as the city's Title II, ADA Title II coordinator, I'm happy to report that we have made substantial progress on our Americans with Disabilities Act action plan. We have identified deficiencies and barriers to the federal requirements, and not only have a plan to address them, but we have made substantial progress on its implementation. We have also continued efforts in place to ensure that city program services and activities are accessible. Coming up in 2018, we have identified some initial work on captioning of city council meetings and informational videos that's planned for 2018 and 2019. Although this was not included in the proposed 2018 budget that you are now considering, we believe that we can begin some of this work in 2018 with existing resources. However, I do want to make sure that we note that in order to stay consistent with our plan and to meet federal requirements, that ongoing budget support will definitely be needed by 2019 to reach the level of service we've identified in the plan. One final note before I close is that we have reviewed the current plan and the status of the plan with the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities. Nick presented to them, I believe, about a week ago, actually over the last couple months, to review the status and then also the work that's planned for coming up in 2018. They were planning on being here today, but they were unable to attend. Just really wanted to make sure I conveyed the message to the council that they consider and would like the council to make sure that captioning remain a priority in the plan as we move forward. With that, Chair Gordon, that completes our presentation.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you could just be more specific about what will actually get captioned in 2018? So will the council meetings be live captioned when they're broadcast? How soon will that start? Will committee meetings be? Will planning, other televised meetings that we have?
Chair Gordon and committee members, basically what we identified in 2018 in the plan is that we would begin captioning of our informational videos that the city puts out, as well as having staff support. We need a part-time staff person to really kind of coordinate that work, getting it underway, setting up the vendor services. The idea would be in 2019, according to our plan, that we would actually caption city council meetings. In addition to that, in 2018, it was identified that a graphic designer would be be added to the communications department in order to help web content and also graphics work that's being done by the city to be ADA accessible. Based on what's proposed in the budget right now, the graphic design piece is basically off the table. What we're going to do is we're going to proceed with doing an RFP around vendor services for the captioning work, and then really take a look at existing resources that we currently have to see what we can start implementing in 2018, knowing that we'll also need to come back to the council in 2019 with an ongoing budget piece. So I can't say for sure right now exactly what's going to roll out in 2018, other than we're going to do a further assessment about what the actual costs are going to be. We have a pretty good idea what those are, but we want to get we can do an RFP to get that underway. And then based on existing resources, including staff and money, what we're able to move forward with.
So the RFP will be to provide captioning for the informational videos that are produced?
As well as we will be asking for information on captioning council meetings as well.
So we'll know what the cost is, but we won't necessarily be able to start providing that until 2019. I mean, it sounds like, and only if the council puts the money in the budget.
Chair Gordon, great question. We're figuring this out as we go. So I will say, because it wasn't in the budget. So what we're doing with the RFP is to get information about the cost of the video captioning as well as the council meetings. Once we get that information, we will then make a further assessment about what we can move forward with next year. And it may be a mix of that. It may be one of those. It may be just part of one. We don't know quite yet, but we're going to try to move forward with as much as we can with a much more, we won't be as robust as we had originally had intended for next year. But we do have the Director of Communications here, if you'd like to.
I see that, and if you want to add something, you can, but it's just that you're here to listen to me, because or anybody else who wants to weigh in also. I think, so what I'm understanding now is the RFP is actually going to be so we can explore what the costs are of maybe the full package, if somebody's interested, and I'll call the full package of being whenever we broadcast, we'll have some captioning, would be, I think, what our goal should be and what we called out for in our action plan that we've submitted and approved, which we'd work towards. So that would be, that's fantastic. It'll be good to see what those costs might be. I was disappointed that it didn't come through in the mayor's recommended budget this year, but I also really appreciate that it sounds like folks have been working on being nimble and flexible and seeing how we can roll some of this out with what we have currently.
Chair Gordon, if I may, just in addition to the information I talked about with the People with Disabilities Committee, in that we'll be having a discussion with them about what is the priority for the community if we were to roll this out in a limited fashion next year. What pieces of information would be the most important to begin with, and we can help work with the community to help prioritize that as well. I do want to reiterate, as the Title II coordinator for the city, we will need to address this in 2019. According to our plan and to meet federal requirements, we will need to provide captioning for the city council meetings and our informational videos by the end of 2019.
I appreciate you saying that. I think we should hear it from you, and we should figure out how to do it and not necessarily hear it from some judge somewhere and some date and have some consequences that way. I think we want to avoid that. I think there's a lot of people who would really be able to appreciate having live access to what's going on in their city government and probably don't understand why they don't have it already. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we keep the same team up for the next report. Okay. And this is about language access, and it's not necessarily sign language or closed caption, but it's more about interpretation and translation, I believe. But I'll let you tell us what it is.
Chair Gordon, committee members, once again, my name is Nick Ngo, and I'm the ADA and Language Access Coordinator for the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. And I'm here to also deliver the annual report for the Language Access Plan. The Language Access Plan covers two federal requirements. The first is the Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin, as well as an Executive Order 13166 that prohibits discrimination on the basis of language. The plan was adopted by the Council in 2015, which was an update of a 2004 plan as well, and it's a policy document that is meant for city staff to effectively communicate with our non-too-limited English-speaking residents. It has our protocols as well as guidance on how to provide access to our city programs and services in multiple languages. And the plan outlines the city's current language services that's managed by NCR. And these services includes notices, phone interpreting, in-person interpreting, as well as translation services. The plan identifies 7 primary languages for Minneapolis: Spanish, Hmong, Somali, Amharic, Vietnamese, Lao, and Oromo. And these populations are calculated by using school data and the city's total population. I also want to note that under the plan, we do say that if the language is not a primary language, we still have to provide services in that language upon request. Since the adoption of the Language Access Plan, we have done a lot of great work and gone through a lot of great accomplishments. The first of which was in 2015 when we worked with 311 to enhance our language lines. 311 included our Hmong, Somali, Spanish lines as pre-dial options to their call tree system, which also saw a significant increase in usage of those particular lines. In 2016, we refreshed our language services vendor pool. We actually did an RFP to contract with local vendors that understood the community dialects and linguistic styles here locally. We also acquired new interpreting equipment, which actually increased the capacity and the language in terms of how many people we could serve on site for in-person interpreting, as well as the languages that we could support for those particular meetings, as well as public hearings. And then we reviewed and created new language services protocol and support for public hearings as well. In 2017, we launched what we call our language services portal, which streamlined the request process for interpreting and translation services. And this allowed us to actually track these requests and services much better. And then we continue to support public hearings and meetings in multiple languages. So over the years, we've seen a 500% increase in terms of our expenditures on contracted language services. NCR manages a majority of the city's language contracts, and what we saw was in 2016 an expenditure of $103,000. For this year, we're expected to go over that expenditure at $118,000. Really quick, I would like to show our dashboard, which also includes other statistics under our language services. So this last year, as you may see, we provided over 20 different services and we provide services in 23 different languages, a majority of which are our primary services, such as languages such as Somali, Spanish, Hmong, and Oromo. And we do provide services for this last year in other languages such as Arabic, Farsi, French, Karen, Italian, Russian, to name a few. It loads. Sorry, I'm having technology issues. But let me try one more time.
Did we lose the PowerPoint?
As I mentioned previously, we actually worked with our 301 department to improve our language lines, which saw at least a 200% increase in usage for the Spanish, Somali, and Hmong lines. I'll just go back. So for 2018, we will be bringing back the language access plan for an update, which will include a bilingual premium pay policy that Human Resources is currently working on, as well as continued evaluation of our city operations and interactions with non-to-limited English-speaking residents. And then as part of our accomplishments, we are currently issuing an RFP to refresh our contracted vendor pool to include more services, not only for our city departments, but also the police department as well. And then for next year, we'll be working with communications closely in the Joint Information Center to provide information and materials in multiple languages. That concludes my presentation. I stand for questions.
Thank you very much. I just have one question, and I think this comes up from time to time. Whether or not we're better off contracting for services or actually hiring some full-time right now. And it seems like as we're spending more and more contracting for the services, we might hit a point where we'd say, oh, it might be more valuable for us to have somebody who's just spending more full-time services helping the city out. Are we tracking that? Are we comparing it? Do we have some staff that are providing these services who are on payroll? And how's that working out?
Chair Gordon, committee members, that question is actually being answered by Human Resources right now. They're actually working on it. The bilingual premium pay policy is exploring compensation for staff to utilize their secondary language as part of their primary roles. And then a part of that policy is actually a testing component to make sure that they are able to effectively communicate and interpret between English and their native language in their line of work as well. So we are exploring that, and we want to make sure that whichever staff person is hired into doing those for that particular department, that they have their skills necessary to do that level of work.
Well, and I think that's great, and it makes a lot of sense to do some testing or make sure there's some competency in the whole translation area. But that also seems more, that's so somebody has gets paid a premium for some additional skills to their regular assignments and their regular role. And I'm not sure if there would ever be a point where we could just have someone on staff if we were doing so much translation in Spanish, for example. It looks like it's the most. It's like, okay, we could easily save a little money if we just paid somebody or not. So that's kind of that's also, I mean, you're answering my question, but that's just another aspect to it. I don't believe we have any full-time translators or interpreters on staff right now. Is that correct? Maybe Mr. Rubidor wants to.
Chair Gordon and committee members, again, David Rubidor, Director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. That's a very interesting and valid question to be asking. I don't think we're there yet as far as our demand of this service, but at some point we may very well be, and we'll continue to assess as we move along. One of the advantages of having the vendor contracted services is it's very flexible. We can have multiple events going on at the same time and having multiple translators in essence available. And I don't see the need for that ever changing, but also by building capacity for those ongoing kind of staffing roles, that if staff were to be located that spoke various languages and that were online, or basically on-call interpreters for the city, you know, there's clearly an advantage to that. But I do see we'll still need to have some vendor services, just because oftentimes we have multiple events going on at the same time. And so I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think we're quite there yet, but as we track this, and we continue to see that projection, as you see, it's going up at a steady pace. At some point, we'll need to make that call whether it makes sense to actually add staff that's their primary responsibility.
I appreciate that, and that makes some sense, especially when you consider the 40-hour work week someone might be hired for. A lot of the translating services might be needed in the evenings or off hours or those kinds of things. So something to think about, though. I don't see any other questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to move to receive and file this report. Did I actually move to receive and file the other report? Well, let's do both of them together then. Any comments or questions on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. With that, we've covered all the business before us, and this meeting is adjourned.